Robert Mercer stared at the spreadsheet on his computer screen, the numbers neatly aligned in columns. At 58, he found comfort in the orderliness of accounting, the way everything balanced in the end, the way errors could always be found if you looked carefully enough. He adjusted his reading glasses and sighed, stretching his back against the leather chair in his home office. His wife of 32 years appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. At 55, Diane still maintained the elegant posture that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's dinner party all those years ago. Her brown hair, now streaked with silver, was cut in a stylish bob that framed her face. "Still working on the Hendersons' taxes?" she asked, setting the mug on his desk. "Oh, the usual. We're reading that new bestseller everyone's talking about. Sarah wouldn't stop going on about the plot twist." Diane leaned against the doorframe. "I'm heading to bed soon. Don't stay up too late." After Diane left, Robert returned to the Hendersons' tax documents. As he sorted through the receipts, a credit card statement caught his eye, not because of anything related to the Hendersons, but because it reminded him that he needed to organize his and Diane's statements for their own taxes. He opened the drawer where he kept their personal financial documents and pulled out a folder. As he flipped through their joint credit card statements, something unusual caught his eye. There were charges from the Lakeside Hotel, a local establishment about 20 minutes from their house, on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 months. Each charge was for a single night, and each fell on a Thursday. He dismissed the thought immediately. There must be some mistake, or perhaps Diane had mentioned meeting her book club at the hotel restaurant instead of at Sarah's house, as they usually did. He made a mental note to ask her about it in the morning and returned to the Hendersons' taxes. But as he worked, the hotel charges nagged at him. Why would there be room charges if they were just meeting at the restaurant? And why hadn't Diane mentioned the change of venue? Over the next few days, Robert found himself paying closer attention to Diane's habits. He noticed how she kept her phone face down on tables, how she took calls in another room, how she seemed to check her phone more frequently than before. On Friday evening, they joined their friends the Wilsons for dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. As they waited for their entrees, Robert excused himself to use the restroom. On his way back, he paused, observing their table from a distance. Diane was looking down at her lap, her fingers moving across her phone screen, a small smile playing on her lips. When Greg Wilson made a comment, she quickly put the phone away, laughing a bit too enthusiastically at whatever he'd said. That night, after they returned home and Diane had fallen asleep, Robert lay awake, listening to her steady breathing. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across their bedroom, the same bedroom they'd shared for nearly 3 decades. After several minutes of internal debate, he reached for Diane's phone on her nightstand. He knew her passcode, her birth year, and the phone unlocked easily. Robert felt a pang of guilt as he opened her messages, telling himself he was being paranoid. But then he saw the conversation with someone named Tom. The most recent message had come in while they were at dinner. "Missed you today. Next Thursday can't come soon enough." Robert scrolled up, his heart pounding in his chest. The messages left little doubt. Diane and this Tom had been meeting regularly on Thursdays at the Lakeside Hotel. He carefully placed the phone back on her nightstand and returned to his side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come that night. Over the next 2 weeks, Robert became a detective in his own marriage. He maintained his routine, going to his accounting firm, having dinner with Diane, watching their usual shows, but inside, he was unraveling. He called Sarah, ostensibly to ask about a book recommendation for Diane's birthday. "Oh, that's thoughtful, Robert," Sarah said. "But I'm not sure what the book club is reading these days. We haven't met in months. Everyone's been so busy." "We used to, but we put it on hold after the holidays. Diane didn't mention that?" "Must have slipped my mind," Robert said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. After hanging up, he sat at his desk, staring at the framed photo of him and Diane on their 30th anniversary trip to Italy. The smiling faces seemed to belong to different people now. Robert considered confronting Diane immediately, but decided he needed more information. As an accountant, he knew the importance of having all the facts before drawing conclusions. He made an appointment with James Harrington, a private investigator recommended by a colleague who had gone through a divorce last year. "I need to know for certain," Robert told Harrington in his sparse office. "I need evidence." 3 days later, Harrington delivered a manila envelope to Robert's office. Inside were photos of Diane entering the Lakeside Hotel with a tall, silver-haired man. More photos showed them having lunch at a cafe, holding hands across the table. The final image was of them kissing in the hotel parking lot. "His name is Thomas Blackwell," Harrington explained. 62 years old. Divorced twice. Works as a financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Management. Robert felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. Tom Blackwell was one of his firm's clients. Robert had been advising him on tax strategies for his investment portfolio for the past year. Back at his office, Robert reviewed their joint accounts more thoroughly. He found evidence of dinners at upscale restaurants when he'd been working late. Small jewelry purchases from a boutique Diane had never mentioned. A weekend spa retreat when she'd told him she was visiting her sister in Cleveland. The betrayal was methodical, documented in credit card statements and bank withdrawals. The accountant in him appreciated the paper trail. The husband in him was devastated by it. Robert hesitated, then closed his door. "Did you know Diane is having an affair with Tom Blackwell?" Alan's expression shifted from surprise to discomfort. "I had my suspicions. I saw them together at Café Laurent a few weeks ago. They seemed intimate. I wasn't sure if maybe you two had. I didn't want to assume." Alan looked down. "A couple of months. I'm sorry, Rob. I should have said something." That evening, as Robert drove home, his phone rang. It was his daughter, Emily. "Dad, is everything okay? You didn't respond to my email about visiting next month." Robert pulled into a grocery store parking lot, suddenly unable to continue driving. "Emily, his voice broke. And then, sitting in his car as the sun set, Robert told his daughter everything. The hotel charges, the text messages, the photos. As he spoke, tears ran down his face, the first he'd shed since discovering the affair. "Oh, Dad," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" After hanging up, Robert sat in his car for a long time, feeling both relief and shame at having shared his pain with his daughter. But as he finally drove home, he knew what he needed to do next. For him and Robert spent the weekend planning the confrontation. He organized the evidence, the credit card statements, the photos, the timeline of Diane's deceptions, with the same meticulous attention he gave to his clients' tax audits. By Sunday evening, he was ready. "Diane," he said as they finished dinner, "I'd like to take you out tomorrow night, to Marcello's." She looked surprised. Marcello's was where they celebrated their anniversaries. "What's the occasion?" Monday evening, they were seated at their usual table at Marcello's. Diane wore the pearl necklace he'd given her for their 25th anniversary. Robert had ordered a bottle of Barolo, her favorite. They made small talk through the appetizers, about their son's new job, about the renovations they were considering for the kitchen. Robert waited until after the main course, when the waiter had cleared their plates and left them with their wine. "Diane," he said, his voice calm despite his racing heart, "I know about Tom." Robert reached into his jacket and placed the hotel receipt on the table. "The Lakeside Hotel, room 312, last Thursday." He added the photo of them entering the hotel together. "And the Thursday before that." Another photo joined the first. "And the one before that." "Please do." He folded his hands on the table, as if they were discussing a client's tax strategy. "Have been sleeping together for months," Robert finished for her. "On the nights you told me you were a book club. A book club that, according to Sarah, hasn't met since December." Diane's eyes darted around the restaurant, aware of the other diners nearby. "Can we discuss this at home?" "I think we're doing fine here." Robert's voice remained steady. "I've been reviewing our accounts. The dinner at Le Bistro when I was working late on the Peterson audit. The bracelet from Ellington's Jewelry. The weekend at Cedar Springs Spa when you were supposedly visiting your sister." "It was just physical," Diane said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It didn't mean anything." 32 years of marriage, and that's your defense? That betraying me meant nothing? "You've been emotionally absent for years, Robert," she hissed, anger replacing her initial shock. "Always at the office. Always with your clients. When was the last time you really saw me? Really listened? So this is my fault?" Robert's composure slipped, his voice rising. "You lie to me for months. Sleep with another man. One of my clients, by the way. And somehow I'm to blame? Let them stare. I'm done keeping up appearances." Robert took a sip of wine, his hand trembling slightly. "How long has it been going on?" The admission hit Robert like a physical blow. A year. While he was preparing their taxes, planning their retirement, thinking about the future they would share, she had been building a separate life. "Why, Tom," he asked, needing to understand. Of all people, why my client? It just happened. He was attentive. He made me feel desired. When was the last time you looked at me that way? Robert thought of the nights he'd worked late, the weekends spent catching up on paperwork. He had been building their financial security, planning for a retirement where they would want for nothing, but perhaps he had been taking their emotional connection for granted. I deserve better than this, Diane. After 32 years, I deserved honesty. Tears welled in her eyes. I know. I'm sorry, Robert. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. Every Thursday night. Every lie. Every time you came home to me, after being with him. Robert placed several bills on the table to cover their meal. I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight. I need time to think. As he walked out of Marcello's, leaving Diane sitting alone at their anniversary table, Robert felt the eyes of other diners on him. He held his head high, maintaining the dignity that Diane had discarded so carelessly. In his car, he finally allowed himself to break down, sobbing like he hadn't since his father's death 20 years ago. When the tears subsided, he checked into a hotel, not the lakeside, and ignored the barrage of calls and texts from Diane throughout the night. The following morning, Robert checked out of the hotel and drove to his office. He had barely slept, but there was work to be done, both professional and personal. His first call was to a divorce attorney, Lawrence Simmons, whom he knew through the local business association. I need to understand my options, Robert explained after sharing the basics of his situation. Given the evidence of infidelity, you're in a strong position, Lawrence advised. Virginia still considers adultery in divorce proceedings. It can affect spousal support and property division. I don't want to destroy her, Robert clarified. I just want what's fair. Next, Robert drafted a formal letter to Tom Blackwell, informing him that his firm would no longer be providing accounting services to him or his company. The letter was professional, making no mention of the affair, but Robert knew Tom would understand the reason. After sending the letter, Robert composed an email to Tom's wife, Sarah Blackwell. He had debated this step, but ultimately decided she deserved to know, just as he had deserved to know. The email was brief and factual, attaching 2 photos as evidence but avoiding vindictive language. By afternoon, Robert had changed the beneficiaries on his life insurance policy and retirement accounts, removing Diane and designating his children instead. He also transferred half of their joint savings into a separate account in his name only, leaving Diane's half untouched. When he finally returned home that evening, Diane was waiting in the living room, her eyes red from crying. Taking care of business, Robert replied, hanging up his coat. I'll be staying in the guest room until we figure things out. Robert, please. I've ended it with Tom. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. We can work through this. Robert nodded, then went to his office and returned with his laptop. He opened it to show a photo time-stamped from 3 hours ago. Tom and Diane in his car, parked behind a shopping center. Harrington is very thorough, Robert said quietly. Don't lie to me again, Diane. I can handle the truth, however painful. What I can't handle is more deception. Diane collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. I don't know what to do. I'm confused. I care about both of you. Well, I'm making it simple for you, Robert said, closing the laptop. I filed for divorce. You'll be served papers tomorrow. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Robert headed toward the stairs. I've taken the liberty of dividing our joint savings. Your half remains in the account. I've moved out my portion. I suggest you find your own attorney. As he climbed the stairs to the guest room, Robert felt a strange sense of calm. The methodical steps he'd taken today, the same approach he used when preparing for a complex audit, had given him back a sense of control in a situation where he'd felt powerless. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and emotional conversations. Robert moved into a hotel temporarily, refusing to be driven from their home permanently, but needing space from Diane's tearful pleas and promises. Their children reacted differently to the news. Emily, their daughter, was firmly in Robert's corner, barely speaking to her mother. Michael, their son, tried to remain neutral, suggesting family therapy even as the divorce proceedings moved forward. Friends and acquaintances inevitably took sides. Couples they had socialized with for years suddenly found reasons to be busy when Robert called. Others, particularly those who had experienced infidelity themselves, rallied around him. Robert's business suffered temporarily as rumors spread through their small community. Some clients, uncomfortable with the personal drama, took their business elsewhere. But most stayed loyal, appreciating the decades of meticulous service Robert had provided. One evening, about a month after moving out, Robert received a call from his brother, James. "One day at a time," Robert replied, sitting on the balcony of his hotel room. "The divorce should be finalized in a few months. Listen, I know we haven't talked about this much, but I went through something similar with Karen before we divorced. If you need someone who understands, I'm here." Robert had almost forgotten that James's first marriage had ended because of infidelity. They had never discussed it in depth. The Mercer men weren't known for sharing feelings. As spring turned to summer, the practical matters of divorce consumed Robert's attention. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided. Their retirement accounts would remain separate. Diane would keep her car, Robert would keep his. The furniture and household items were divided through tense negotiations between their attorneys. The most difficult moments came during family events. Michael's birthday dinner was an exercise in forced politeness. Thanksgiving required elaborate scheduling to ensure Robert and Diane wouldn't have to see each other. Christmas brought painful memories of happier times. Through it all, Robert maintained his professional demeanor, never speaking ill of Diane in public, never using their children as pawns. But privately, he struggled with anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of failure. 6 months after discovering the affair, Robert joined a support group for divorced men at the suggestion of his attorney. Initially skeptical, he found unexpected comfort in sharing his story with others who understood the unique pain of betrayal. "The hardest part," he admitted during his third meeting, "is not knowing if anything was ever real. Were there signs I missed? Was she unhappy for years and I just didn't notice?" "That's the mind trap," said George, a group member who had been divorced for 5 years. "You can drive yourself crazy with those questions. At some point, you have to accept that her choices were hers, not yours." Around this time, Robert decided to renovate the small lake house they had purchased 10 years earlier as a weekend getaway. Diane had never shown much interest in the property, preferring luxury hotels for vacations. Now Robert threw himself into the project, working alongside contractors on weekends, making decisions about flooring and fixtures, creating a space that reflected only his tastes. He also began exercising regularly, something he had neglected during the demanding tax seasons of recent years. Morning runs along the lake near his hotel became a ritual, a time to clear his head before facing the day. By summer's end, he had lost 20 pounds and gained a confidence he hadn't felt in years. It was during one of these morning runs that he literally bumped into Sarah Jenkins, a former colleague who had left the firm 5 years earlier when her husband died unexpectedly. "Robert, is that you?" she asked, steadying herself after their collision. "I hardly recognized you." They ended up having coffee at a nearby cafe, catching up on the years since they had worked together. Robert found himself telling her about the divorce, surprised by how easily the words came now. "I remember when Jim died," Sarah said, stirring her latte. "Everyone kept saying it would get easier with time. I hated hearing that because the pain felt so permanent." But they were right, in a way. It doesn't disappear, but you learn to carry it differently. There was something comforting about Sarah's perspective, the way she acknowledged pain without being defined by it. They exchanged numbers before parting, promising to meet for coffee again soon. As summer turned to fall, Robert's divorce was finalized. He signed the papers in his attorney's office, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. That evening, he sat alone on the deck of his newly renovated lake house, watching the sunset reflect on the water. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thinking of you today, Dad. Love you." Robert smiled, grateful for his daughter's unwavering support throughout the ordeal. He had worried that the divorce would damage his relationship with his children, but in some ways, it had strengthened their bonds. They related to each other more as adults now, with a new honesty that had been missing before. The following weekend, Robert invited both Emily and Michael to the lake house for dinner. As they sat around the fire pit after the meal, Michael raised his beer bottle in a toast. Later, after his children had left, Robert stood on the dock, looking up at the stars. For the first time in months, he thought about Diane without feeling a stab of pain. He wondered briefly where she was tonight, whether she was still seeing Tom, whether she had found whatever she had been looking for when she betrayed their marriage. But the thoughts came and went, without consuming him. Their coffee meetings had evolved into regular hikes and occasional dinners. Robert was proceeding cautiously, aware of his still healing heart, but he enjoyed Sarah's company, her quick wit, her resilience, her straightforward approach to life. 1 year after discovering Diane's credit card charges, Robert stood in his office at the firm, packing the last of his personal items. He had decided to sell his share of the business to Alan and open a smaller practice focusing on financial planning for retirees, work that energized him and allowed for a better work-life balance. As he placed the last framed certificate into a box, he paused, noticing the empty space on the wall where a photo of him and Diane had once hung. He had removed it months ago, but the slight discoloration on the wall still marked its absence. Robert ran his hand over the spot, thinking about all that had changed in a year. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. He doubted it ever would, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now were the choices he had made in response to betrayal, to maintain his integrity, to rebuild with purpose, to remain open to joy despite the risk of pain. That evening, Robert met Sarah at a restaurant overlooking the lake. As they clinked glasses in celebration of his new venture, he realized he was no longer looking backward at what he had lost, but forward to what might still be possible. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing his momentary distraction. "I was just thinking that life rarely balances perfectly," Robert replied with a small smile. "But sometimes, if you're patient enough, it comes pretty close." As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across their table, Robert felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The ledger of his life would always show the entry of Diane's betrayal, a significant loss that could never be erased. But on the other side of the balance sheet, he was beginning to record new gains: self-discovery, deeper relationships with his children, the lake house that was truly his home, and perhaps, in time, a new chance at love with someone who valued honesty as much as he did. For an accountant who had spent his life ensuring that debits and credits balanced perfectly, it was a profound realization that sometimes the most accurate accounting of a life includes both painful losses and unexpected gains, and that the true balance is found not in avoiding pain, but in how you respond to it.